We're already up to our last session for this evening. And Koushik, welcome.
Yes.
Great to have you here.
Hi, Luke. Hi, Roland.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Are we pronouncing your name correctly? That's always the...
Koushik. Yes.
Koushik. Okay.
Koushik.
Thank you so much.
Koushik.
When I read your profile, it seemed you had the most awesome job ever at Capgemini because you help teams to develop and deliver applications on Azure. Is there something you can tell us about your current role, what you're working on?
Yes, that's indeed fantastic. For the last 3 years, I'm working at multiple cloud center of excellence, so CCCs or COEs, what they call, and working with insurance companies, manufacturing, and banking sectors. So quite amazing to see a lot of knowledge. And Azure Thursdays was one of my inputs to learn and apply at my job. So it's fantastic, and thanks for this opportunity.
That's very cool. Well, we're very glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks.
And you also already mentioned it, Cloud Centers of Excellence. And during your session, you're going to touch upon setting up Cloud Centers of Excellence. What is the one pitfall we should try to avoid? What can we tell our employers they should not do when setting up?
Overdo stuff.
Yeah, that's the main issue usually, that they're just trying to work everything out at once.
So what I have noticed at all the three is when you have a developer working, not administrators or data center mindset people, it's always useful to have that development knowledge where you can poke around and say, oh, we can do this already in .NET. Why can't I do it in Azure this way? And you link stuff, you orchestrate stuff. I come from integration background as well, and I try to link and mix up stuff. And okay, there you go. That's how you want to do it. So that's my approach. And looking at working with Microsoft colleagues mostly, and some very talented people, you see their approach towards Azure is also more on, let's tailor it, let's change it, let's make Microsoft redo the work on specific Azure components. That's their approach on all the Azure resources and services, what they provide. So that's what keeps me motivated doing this job.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for a session, right? You're going to talk about building DevOps extensions?
Yes. So we will have a small session where we can build it, package it, publish it, and then push it to an organization, and then we use it. And that would be a simple one, which we start. And then I will show you a small application which I just built, the extension which I built as well, which does similar approach, not covering all the patterns, but some of the patterns, which I want to showcase as well in the presentation. And I hope it is useful for application team or non-CCoEs as well to use it and develop it in their software life cycles.
Okay. Well, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Take it away. Thank you.
All right. So let me share my screen. Share screen. This is the screen 2. And share. Let me know if you guys already see the screen. So I am Koushik Aravalli. Thank you for this opportunity at Azure Thursday. I work for Capgemini Netherlands here, and I'm working for mostly clients who are working towards building Microsoft's cloud adoption framework on Azure. And when we are seeing these organizations which are building their CCoEs or cloud adoption framework, so let's go back a little bit. What is cloud adoption framework? When we go to Microsoft Docs in the architecture section, we see details about well-architected and cloud adoption framework. So to be in a very simple words, a cloud adoption framework is a collection of best practices and tools with some implementation guidelines for organizations to move faster towards their cloud adoption. So when we are looking at these businesses who are trying to move from on-premise data centers and have their workloads move to public cloud, we see that they have all the governance and the security principles which they would like to also extend it. And they want to have everything secure, of course, and that is understandable. And when they are working in the direction of extending those services or extending those models and principles, typically Azure Resources out of box do not all sit in the same model. So if you look at financials or if you look at the healthcare industry, this data is secure. They do not want to have any SMB port open on their VNet, but one of the Azure services, Azure file share, just says 445, open it, and then you're there. Earlier, we had a discussion, should we have 445 port open or not? So small thing, but in an organization, it's quite a big impact, which could harm the governing principles or the security guidelines of it. So we have Azure services, a lot of Azure services, and we start looking into these Azure services. But when organization takes a look at these Azure services, as I said, they are going to tailor it. When I'm using the word tailoring it, they are going to change the way the behavior is going to remain the same, but the configuration around it is going to be updated with other Azure services and other nitty-gritty details. And that is where Azure DevOps plays a very crucial role in automating it and giving the same product, the tailored product, across the business or all the teams who are within the business. So in this presentation today, I'm going to talk about building Azure DevOps extension at Cloud Center of Excellence. So Cloud Center of Excellence is an operation model within Cloud Adoption Framework on Azure. So that's a basic start where I want to go with, and that's where the story also goes in my presentation. To begin with, I'll just give very briefly CCoE, the Cloud Center of Excellence functions, and how we are going to use Azure DevOps. We give the functional value for these functions, which it is trying to deliver. And then with Azure DevOps, we are going to build an extension, a very simple extension. We'll build it, package it, and we'll publish it and distribute it, share it across organization. And then there are a few design patterns which for use while using Azure DevOps extensions that I will go through. Pretty simple, but quite effective and commonly seen and implemented as well. So let's start and let's see what Cloud Center of Excellence is. So as I already said, Cloud Center of Excellence is an operation model on Cloud Adoption Framework. And one of the persons, Stephen Orban, he was one of the he coined this CCoE. He mentions that when a business has an application hosted in public cloud platform, they should start thinking about or should already have a team, a dedicated team, cross-functional, who is responsible for building a sustainable, resilient framework which supports the cloud operations. So all the cloud operations or cloud deployments onto cloud and monitoring, all that should be taken care of this cross-functional team. And the team is also responsible for advocating and giving good practices towards the business and IT organization part of the business, thereby transforming it, modernizing it to the next level, and make it easy for the DevOps teams to not bother about other components. And the CCoE keeps the complexity, solving the problems for them by meeting the business standards. So it's too much, but that's how CCoE is termed. And when Microsoft's cloud adoption framework, where it comes into play, is it has all these functions which will meet these business IT organization transformation. And it says, I'm going to help you adopt to the cloud strategy. I'm going to help you govern it and make a running, resilient platform, cost-effective platform, and importantly, automate everything for you so that it's easy for teams to use it and have it implemented for their application deployments. And since these functions are quite large, one simple theme would not work. As I already said, it's a cross-functional team. There are multiple teams who are working on it, and they have objectives to deliver a complete package that meets these functions. So their main objective would end up as like a solution package, a solution building block for the DevOps teams. And a solution building block is something like a script, a common script, which is used across the teams. It can be a Terraform script, it can be a normal ARM template or a PowerShell script or API, in fact. And then you give it across the teams, give access to the teams, and they use the same script to deploy the infrastructure. And mainly using these solution packages being building blocks, Azure DevOps, the context of Azure DevOps here would be when the package is delivered to the DevOps teams are already using a tool like Jenkins or Octopus deploy or something like Excel deploy. When they are using it, if CCoE delivers a package which can be integrated in their DevOps environment, then using Azure DevOps already has this open and SDKs and toolkits that you can use to build extensions on top of it. And that's where you use Azure DevOps and target Azure as your landing zone. So that's the basic brief functionality of how CCoE, CDF, everything is integrated. And Azure DevOps comes into play that way. Before I go to the definitions of Azure DevOps, I will browse to Azure DevOps for a quick moment and show you in a brief overview. So I just went to Azure DevOps. This is a basic overview. I'm at the organization, Koushik. I can create many organizations here. Azure DevOps is a cloud-hosted service, and I have multiple projects which I have access to. For this demo, I just created some samples. So every project has specific services in them. So these services, I could have only pipeline service in some cases, and boards, etc. But in this presentation and demo, we are going to look into pipeline services. I will go into pipeline service. A pipeline service has either has more of a build definitions and release definitions. So let me go to a release definition for sampling. And there is a release definition. I will create a new release definition. And if it shows up soon, and the release definition, I'm going to add this empty job for now. I'll show you what our demo would be and what we would be writing code for. And there's an agent where it's a server where a small component can be, a work component can be deployed, and our artifact can be made. So there are a lot of tasks. So tasks are the smallest granular pieces within a pipeline, which you can add and make it orchestrate your deployment process or your build process. And using these tasks, we are going to build a custom task here, which can be integrated within our release pipeline, and we will deploy it. So let's go back to the presentation again. And so we know the task. Task is the smallest piece of work within the pipeline. And when we have more tasks, so a product in Azure service, each Azure service can be bundled into one task, or only one part of a service can also be bundled into a task. When you have hundreds of these tasks, you can wrap them together, make a cover out of it, and make the bag that would be an Azure a pipeline extension, Azure DevOps pipeline extension. So you install an extension, you use the tasks within your extension, and use the task within the release pipeline, release definition, to deploy or make an artifact out of it. So it will help the DevOps teams to improve their release pipelines view or customizing it, so the experience of it would be modified. A little further, so now we have seen Azure DevOps extension, what it is, and what we are going to do. So what's the development of it? It's normal .NET development or any kind of a development, what we do. So we build it, test it, package it, and we publish it. So we deploy it, and then you give access to it, share it, and then you monitor the behavior of your application, same thing. And then finally, in this demo, we are going to do Azure Resource deployment. Yeah? All right, so we already seen the task. Now we know the life cycle of it, and how does it look like? So the basic look and feel of an extension is quite simple. An extension, the top here. So this is an extension icon where it has two parts. One is a manifest file, which is a JSON file, which maps all the tasks which it has. And it has a front face icon, so a sticker on top of it. How should it be seen or given access to, or someone will see it when they are adding it to their pipeline. And then the task itself, the task is merely 2-3 components. For a very, very simple task, what we are looking at now, it's a task.json, which says a task.json is nothing more than a input file, which would be translated to the user interface by Azure DevOps when you use the SDKs or the PowerShell modules. And you have a backend script, so a TypeScript or a PowerShell script, which you can use to deploy the Azure Resource or Azure Service within Azure Platform. And finally, you just have a sticker again, an icon, which says, okay, this is how my task is going to look, and the look and feel part of it in the pipeline. So that's there, and let's start some code. I will go to Visual Studio. I'll switch to Visual Studio now. Yeah, I think that's it. So what I have done is I created a sample folder for sake of time. It's empty folder with task 1 and icons in it, and then there are PS modules. PS modules are, remember I said something like Azure DevOps has extensibility parts where there are tools and SDKs. So PS modules are supporting parts that can be integrated within your task, where they will be understood and translated. So our new scripts are going to use this. And let's switch back to our presentation. I'll get back to the extension structure so that we'll create the same structure here. Go back here. Now, this is the main manifest part. I'm going to create a new file, VSS extension.json file. And I'll just paste the manifest. All right. All right, so there is a manifest file here, and I will create a, I will create another file, which is task.json, and I will create a new file, which is main.ps1. So our structure looks like this now. So we have our manifest, we have our task, we have our main, and we already have these stickers, and we have an additional one, which is the SDK. And now I already pasted the manifest code a little too soon, but let's look at it in some detail. So there's an ID, what you're going to give as a publisher. So you're going to create an extension, and you're going to publish it in a market and make it available for the users or organizations. You share it across the organization or within your organization, something like that. You have a version on top of your extension, and you give some metadata, the name, what kind of service it's going to use, icon, okay, all the metadata here. And then finally, we'll say, okay, this is one of the tasks which you should take care of. So the extension is going to bundle task 1, and you have a task where you have task.json file now. Now let's have some code there for task.json. So our task now is also there. It has an ID, similar. It's a GUID, which should be unique across your publisher profile. So I will get back to the publisher profile in a few minutes. Let's look at the task now. And task has some name, friendly name, all the metadata again, with the versions, etc. And you want this from here on, the inputs. So this is where we are trying to integrate our task with the Azure DevOps SDKs, or the extension in the backend. And now this task is aiming to deploy a storage account within a specific resource group. So the input would be a storage account. It's a type pick list. I'll come back to that one in a minute. A storage account, and storage account has, okay, give a name of a storage account, and then you are there. And remember I said about pick list here. I'll come back here. There is a database bindings. Data source bindings are making calls using the connection string that we have provided. So service connections are already available in Azure DevOps, which you link it to your Azure platform. So here in the beginning of the input, I added the service connection. So I'm saying this is the Azure RM service connection, which should be used for deploying my resource. So when the deployment is done, this service principal, the service connection linked to the service principal, would be doing the deployment for me. And the service connection is used in the extension to call all the resource groups and populate it for the user interface perspective. So it simplifies the view. So all what we are trying to do is we are trying to simplify a view and give it to the customer DevOps teams and handle the complexity in the backend of our scripts. Well, in this example, what I'm showing is quite simple, but next example, which I'll show, is a little more uphill than this small script. Let's go to the main PowerShell script. And we'll just say nothing too complicated here. We are just saying, okay, give me the start tracing as the extension, as the task is invoked, add dependencies, and then import the SDK, which I will be using within to get the context of Azure with the service connection that I have integrated. Now I have a resource group and a storage account, which I'm reading from the GUI, and then I'm just calling Azure PS PowerShell module to create a storage account. So our building process is done for this. Let's package it. So if I just have to package it, I just say, okay, TFS extension, old school way of packaging it, and then we have an extension that is ready in a minute. So, all right, so we have an extension, and we have this open folder, revealing a folder. Now let's get back to Azure DevOps portal, and I'll go to a marketplace. So I have a marketplace, which I'm a publisher with the name Koushik Aravalli right now. Sample which I created, and I'm going to add Azure DevOps to it, Azure DevOps extension that we have created just now, and we will drag drop it and upload it. All right, so it's being uploaded, and it's verifying the publisher ID. It's verifying if the task ID is unique. It does validations in the backend. All this is not visible yet, but that's the operations which it does. It's available in the market, but we haven't shared it across the organization. Right now, for this, I'm going to share it within my own organization. So my organization is Koushik Aravalli. And I will go back here and share it. All right, so it's all shared. I'm ready to use it within my pipeline. And how do I install it? So just giving or sharing it with an organization doesn't mean it's already available for the release pipeline, but it should be installed within the organization. So as you go to Azure DevOps, organization settings, and extensions, and we go to share, and there's something shared, which is today at 8:59. All right, let me install it, and its installation is also done. And installation process is not, since this is my own organization, I can install it and I can play around with it. But at CCoE, this is not all possible for a person to install it, not a team to install it, but only specific TRA or elevated users can only use it to install within the organization. So it's all installed. Let's get back to the release pipeline that we started with, and let's refresh it. And within my task, I named it as storage, if you have seen the name of it. So I haven't even saved it. All right, let me do this again. But when we use this extension, here we can say storage, and there it is. There's a storage account which I created, and I can add it. And subscription, it says, okay, Azure DevOps subscription, service connection, and resource groups. These are coming up from the service connection that I have selected, and then I can install it. And I can give a storage account, and a storage account would be deployed within my Azure platform. So that's a simple, quite straightforward Azure extension or task that can be done. Now this is not what we do at CCC, right? Everyone can do this. Now, little more complicated is I picked up Logic App as a sample that I worked up yesterday night to build it, and this is not too complicated, but straightforward as well. An extension with this one dedicated extension for Logic App with having multiple versions in it. I can have one or more versions as well. And I say, okay, for version v.0, I'm going to have scripts which does a creation of a Logic App, which does a removal of a Logic App. Along with it, I'm going to have templates, ARM templates, which does a lot of actions with meeting certain guidelines within a business. So if you want to lock it, you want to monitor it, you want to have it linked to something else. So all that complexity is handled in the backend. But what we see in the front end, so the task.json file, when we see it, I will come back to this one in the view. I have already installed it. So this is quite straightforward as well when we are looking at it. And then we have integrated pipelines where there is this new change here. The change automatically triggers. Remember, I did a TFS, create extension, etc., and worked manually across, copying over. That is, all, of course, not done. There are pipelines which are integrated with it. Any changes which are done are pushing the latest version of the extension into the marketplace. Let's go back here, and let's go back to the marketplace. And there's a Logic App which was deployed, the extension which was deployed here, and it had 20 versions working. and the pipeline does it automatically. All right, it's shared across multiple organizations. Share. So you see they are shared across multiple organizations now, and I can use it within my pipeline. So I'll go to the release pipeline. Yeah, delete this. Logic app, edit. All right, so there's a Logic app extension. What it does is it takes the resource group where we want to host the Logic app. Quite important is a naming convention. There is always a big debate going on with what are the standard naming conventions which go across the organization. So the CCoE has wikis and standard guidelines which are also shared across the business. So teams are aware of what kind of naming convention would be generated for the Azure Resource which they have created. It can be a drop-down which says, okay, I want specific kind of naming convention. So in this case, I said, okay, project, workflow name, location, etc. And then I give a suffix. So this would be only part of what I'm going to deploy. And then I say this is a key vault where my Logic app is going to read the values from. And you can also see I embedded the definition of my Logic app. A definition of a Logic app is a workflow. And what Logic app is a workflow, you can also draw it in Visual Studio. You can extract the definition from Visual Studio, and you can create parameters out of it and have it deployed in one go. This becomes CI/CD for your Logic app. And once I deploy it, I'm getting the details, the definition from my Git, and I deploy the Logic app. So I go back here. Okay, leave this. Okay, I think this one should work. I created a Logic app and created. So I set the target of Logic app to be my my resource group here, past resource group, past workloads, and the Logic app should end up here. So now let's get back to our presentation again. All right, so we have looked at the code, we have looked at extension, and then we are seeing more details of that extension. And coming to the guidelines of it. So the patterns, what we see more frequently are when working with the pipeline, when working with the extension, you might have already seen the code duplication with PS Code, or when there are more tasks, custom tasks which are built, we are going to copy the code and make our Git way too heavy than required. So we don't want such kind of a task where you have Power PS modules copied over hundreds of times. The common functionalities can be skipped over, and then we can end up with a pattern, something like this is a development environment where people are working on. So we have common modules which we save to Git, and with an extension, with a pipeline, we're going to create a NuGet package of that PS module, make an artifact out of it. So any common PowerShell modules are in their version, and any new team coming over, when boarded within Azure DevOps, within the CCoE, takes over the lightweight part of building an extension, reuse the components within the artifact, Azure DevOps artifacts, and they embed it within the pipeline, and then they release their extension to public. So quite straightforward as well. But this pattern minimizes the workload and maintains the code quality, and always reusable parts of code are spread across the organization of at least CCoE in most cases. So that's the first pattern what we see. The second pattern is about how do we secure. So we have created our extension, we have given our extension, we are going to give our extension to the DevOps teams. Azure services are a way to some of the Azure services. Let me put it that way. Some of the Azure services have certain aspects where the governance models will not allow them to be productized to the DevOps teams and use it in their pipelines. For example, a virtual network or an NSG change or Azure Databricks implementation. Or if you look at Azure AD parts, where if you have an application which you're trying to link it with Azure Active Directory, you do not want to give Azure DevOps enough rights to make ownership of applications. That will actually ruin most of the components, the core components that CCoE guards. And in order to secure that, there are principles how you approach it. And one of the patterns, what you typically see at CCoE is you have Azure AD. So this is structure what you always see, this Azure AD with Azure DevOps and Azure Platform. You have all your CCoE and DevOps teams within your Azure AD. And CCoE is delivering an Azure extension, and that is being used by the DevOps teams that we already know. And along with the extension, they integrate it with the API landing in Azure, a secure API, to which the extension always works with, such that it checks the validation of the user, checks the incoming request, checks if there is a deviation from what is expected, etc. So when a DevOps team invokes release, it triggers the extension, and the extension invokes API, HTTP endpoint, and after successful validation, then a resource is deployed within the customer resource group or a subscription. And it is not always that the subservice principle of the DevOps team also has access to deploy specific connectivity options, but they go to a higher service principle, which has more elevated rights to perform a virtual network deployment or AKS deployment or service principle rights, permissions, etc. So this is also quite often what you see as well, and this secures the usage of your extension, and you can stop another team from implementing or making changes to a certain other team who are deploying infrastructure. So that's the second one. And feedback loop. Okay, so we have all the Azure services which we have deployed in Azure with these extensions. The DevOps teams are using these extensions, and they are quite vastly implemented and integrated in the pipelines. When the telemetry or when the logs are seen from the extension, from the task, when the release pipeline runs, it is important for the CCoE teams to the product teams who have built the extension to understand what is the behavior of an extension. Was there a deviation, or was something going wrong, or was something has something been failing frequently? So the proactive monitoring, rather than looking up the next day morning with all the tickets on their board, we can implement feedback loop within the extension by application insights. So the same structure what you see before, CCoE with all the DevOps teams delivering an extension. Now the extension is integrated with application insights. So Azure CCoE team also deploys app insights, and the extension keeps sending the telemetry data, the exceptions, the events, and the workflows which are there, which are done within the pipeline, done by the DevOps team. And it also does the deployment finally in the resource group, and it sends out enough information back to the application insights. And thereby, if there is a deviation, there is a process which reads the logs of application insights and ends up as a item on the DevOps team board that there is a deviation or there is a failure. There has been multiple failures with specific extension of so-and-so version for an organization. So you can also see that when this extension is deployed in another organization, rather than the organization which they have been using, you can also monitor if it was accidentally or there was some mishap which happened that installed it in another organization. You can see the organization details, etc. So that's also a useful pattern what you can see. The next one is okay. Now we are in the CCoE issues, and we are looking at extensions and working with infra as code, etc. And now we are in the application development team, right? So when I'm an application.NET developer writing my API app or a web app, and I want to deploy it, and CCoE is provisioning my configuration. So the configuration is the infrastructure what they are providing me, and I want to make sure that it is always intact and it is not messed up in any part of my release cycles as my team grows and matures further. So the main part is configuration drift, which I'm trying to address here. So what we can see is a pattern where we have something like a sidecar pattern, what you see in normal development, where okay, you monitor your application and you monitor your configuration apart from your application, and then you redeploy. That's the idea behind it. So coming back to the same picture, I'll come back to the sidecar pattern in a minute. So the same picture again. Now we are a DevOps team, not a CCoE anymore, but a normal application development team, multi-regional, and performing. It's quite mature, and they are performing application deployments in very frequent cycles. So they have application pipelines and they have an infra pipeline, and the application pipeline is performing their normal actions. Their release pipeline has been deployed multiple times, and aside with sidecar pattern, you have another another resource group with a logic app. You can also have a function which monitors a specific resource configuration. So for example, if I want to check the history of a specific resource, for example, a virtual network or an AKS cluster, I can check it with the Azure Resource Graph, change history API specifically, where you can see the last half an hour, what was the change, what was the last change, last 5 changes which have been done. If there is a deviation in that configuration, then you can invoke the logic app or a function app to trigger the infra pipeline from Azure and reinstate the configuration, making sure that the application is still running on a governed, secure infrastructure that is provisioned by a CCoE or from the business. So that's the final pattern. And here are some references. And let's go back and check the logic app that we have deployed. So here we should see logic app being deployed, fine. And I'll go back to the resource group. Okay. All right. So there's a logic app, pass workload workflow. All right. This is also deployed. And let's look deeper in it. So this is a logic app with a naming convention. I haven't given this naming convention. I only gave workflow as a sample in my release task. So if I go to release, edit the release, and check it, that is the name of it, workflow, which I have given, but it followed the naming convention, so and so. Now we go back to our logic app. So it is deployed. What else do we see here? So we see it is enabled with identity. So by default, out of box, you do not have logic app with enabled MSI, but now you have enabled the MSI. You have locked your logic app, making sure that it is not deletable. And what else have we done? We have enabled diagnostic settings of logic app. So it is sending data to my OMS workspace, which is living in another resource group, or it could be another subscription as well, but this can be also done. And finally, we go back to the definition of the logic app that we have deployed. We edit it, and should show up with the workflow that we have defined in there. So there it is. So this logic app is trying to monitor the change history of a storage account, for example. And then we have a working logic app with a disabled state. So I haven't enabled it, so I have disabled it as well, so that anytime I can come to the portal or I can do another task to enable it. So that way we are seeing it. Now this logic app deployment is done. Now let's look at another thing about monitoring what has happened with our logic app deployment from the release pipeline. So I have monitoring DevOps extension, the application insights, that has been monitoring how things are going with my extension task. And I go here to events, and it should have had an event which said, okay, it is installed for so-and-so organization or invoked by an organization. Okay. All right, so there it is. So there was something here. More insights, and I'm looking at, okay, so pass workflow LA has been deployed, or it could have also said failed to remove a logic app as an example. So you can have an exception as well, and you can filter it, and you can have a process which monitors your application insights and sends out the data or a dashboard Azure DevOps work item on your Scrum board. So that way, you're pretty much using or customizing your infrastructure and making it easy for the DevOps teams, and hiding the complexity with all the logs, monitoring, etc. on your side. So let's get back to our presentation, and I think that is it. You can go to Azure Pipelines. There is a GitHub link where you can see sample or the open source task which Microsoft has created. And you can also build your own based upon that one. That's sometimes easy to start with. And I also created a blog post on how do we work and how do we make a CI/CD for your extension using a template and the YAML. You can see the YAML file as well. And it should work as you download it and clone the repo. Okay, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please let me know. All right, Luke, Roland, are you there?
Thanks for the session. Yeah, we do have some questions.
Yes.
And the first one is, how are you guys handling rollback and canary deployments for core resources like network, storage, etc.?
When we do the deployments, you guys handle rollback and canary. Okay, so it is quite difficult to answer the rollback process, and we give the extension as a front face, and the backend versions keep updating on the task. So that would be updated, and the user would not see it. And canary deployments are not possible out of the box. What we do is we identify preview customers, and we give handle to the preview customers as a starting point, and then they go forward from there. Based upon the feedback, we continuously improve the product.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And on the chat, we had another question. This looks like a lot of work for a CCoE. How do you prevent the CCoE from becoming an organizational bottleneck?
It is quite often that application teams want to deploy their applications really faster than what CCoE provides. That is quite often what we see. And if the DevOps teams are capable enough of standardizing the extension, so that should be reusable across the organization. That's the main idea of it. So if a DevOps team A has a Kubernetes cluster which is linking to which is hosted in North Europe, and the governing guideline says it is only permitted to do it in West Europe, then you should follow the guidelines and you should be able to tailor it according to the organization, because at the end of the day, you are working for the organization, but you're not working as an island for yourself. So either CCoE becomes a bottleneck, or you will have to tailor it in such a way that it can be used across the organization. I hope that can answer.
Okay, thanks. Well, then that's it for this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
It was nice to have you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
All right.
This is the end of the evening. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to the speakers. Big thanks to our sponsors. And hopefully you will all be watching in September again. It's September the 3rd, I guess. Am I right, Roland?
Yeah, very correct.
Nice. For now, hope you'll enjoy the rest of the evening, and see you next time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.